Welcome to the Queer Network. My name is Justin Gerhardt. This is Queer Talk, and on this episode we have a beautiful panel of transgender people, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you don't mind introducing yourselves and your name and your age and what you do.
Hi, I'm Jonas. I'm 20 and I'm a student.
Amazing.
My name is Ayla. I'm 29 and I'm an artist and YouTuber. I'm starting out.
Amazing, yes.
My name is Lucah. I'm 29 and I am in marketing advertising.
Cool.
I'm Samantha, or Sam. I'm 20 and I'm a full-time student.
Wonderful. So to start off, I want to ask you guys what pronouns you use and how you identify. And I know I already introduced this as the transgender panel, so I kind of gave it away. But I would like to give you that opportunity to own that, or how do you identify? I guess I kind of assumed.
I identify with he, him pronouns, so trans male, trans masculine.
I identify with she, her, and as a woman of trans experience.
I identify as he, him, and either just a man or trans man.
Okay.
Trans girl, or just girl, either or, and she, her are my pronouns.
The first thing I want to talk about, and we did talk about this a little bit in the auditions, is why you want to do this, why you want to be a part of a panel like this.
I guess I would say that it's important to talk about the things that sometimes people are too afraid to bring up or too nervous to ask. And I think it's really important to cover all bases, even things that are hard to talk about or uncomfortable, because you never know like who needs that information,
Right.
And who really wants to know but is kind of on the fence about asking. And
Right.
so I think that this will really uncover a lot of the things that we don't typically talk about as a trans community, for sure.
When I was transitioning, like early on in my transition, I looked to YouTube for almost all my information I could get, and it was such a useful tool, and I learned so much, and I felt less alone and more inspired to transition. And so I hope anyone watching this would feel inspired too. And also a second reason is that there's so much shit in the media right now, especially with Trump and then Ford just saying that like being trans is a liberal ideology. There's just so much misinformation and almost propaganda slander about trans people. So it's like a breath of fresh air for positive trans content.
I wasn't quite sure, I guess, how to answer, but something you said just reminded me too, my YouTube experience, really powerful. I mentioned that even when I just talk about my life in general, that YouTube and online content, and one of the reasons I also make content too is because it's saved my life on many occasions, not just with transition, but it's taught me a lot of things about life, and it's nice to get to a place where I feel like I can actually give back to that.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's so crucial, like visibility, especially because trans experiences are so diverse.
Yeah.
And I know for myself as a kid, it took me years before I ever saw myself represented in media.
Right.
So to put my voice out there, you know, no matter how much I think it might be redundant, someone might see that, and even if one person sees it, it's worth it.
So this brings up where we are in 2018. Why has transgender as a topic, as a lifestyle, or how do we talk about it? Why is it mainstream? Why now?
I think as an existence, it's becoming really prominent because for every voice that says, I am here, I exist, someone else feels comfortable to come out. And so it's just like the growing voices, and we no longer feel alone.
Yeah.
So people are feeling finally valid and liberated to come out.
Yeah. I've always said like the coming out experience is one of the most powerful things you can do as what I would identify as queer people, just to come out as however you identify with that queer community.
And similarly to that as well, I think that we're finally at a place where what we know about trans is just so different because of what you just said, because people are coming out more often, and giving each other the permission to do that opens up less stigma around it. Because if I look back, you know, I transitioned 10 years ago. If I look back 10 years ago, it was like the mainstream for trans was, you're basically fucked up.
Right.
Like that was just, and so growing up with that mentality around something that it was so central to how I was experiencing life and unable to communicate any of those feelings because the general public was saying, if you feel like you're born in the wrong body, essentially there's something wrong with you.
Right.
People who take the spotlight and talk about their experience, we realized, wait, and that's what I found with YouTube. It was seeing people who said, wait, I'm not fucked up.
Yeah.
I actually feel amazing, and this was the best thing I ever did.
Right.
And that's a totally different narrative.
Right. Was there a person? Was there somebody that paved the road for you guys, or how do you see that?
I'm sure we could all answer that. So let's hear that.
Gigi Gorgeous. for
Gigi
me.
Gorgeous.
Well,
Yeah.
she's from Toronto.
Yep.
She was always, before she transitioned and knew she was a woman, she still wore makeup and still cross-dressed, and she was like identified as that like guy in makeup who's like edgy. And then she transitioned. She had facial feminization surgery. So that trajectory is like basically mine.
Yeah.
And I knew I was a trans woman because I saw one of her videos where she got facial feminization surgery and her face looked so much more feminine
Yes.
as described in the surgery. And I was just like, I want that. I didn't know it was a thing, but I didn't know that being trans was a thing that could happen.
Right.
So seeing her actually do it made me realize like I could do it and I could be a girl and I could be happy.
Totally.
She's definitely my icon in that sense.
Who else has some?
I have one. It's not a celebrity or not somebody who's in the media. It was just one close friend that I had for a long time, and I didn't know that he was trans.
Right.
I had been working with him for years, and he asked me one day when I went to work. He said, You seem so stressed. What's going on with you?" And I said, "Well, there's just a lot on my plate. I'm freaked out." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, I've been on testosterone for 4 years, and I started transitioning, blah, blah." And he was the only person I knew in the community at the time, in the trans community. And I hadn't even a clue. Working with him for 2 years prior to that, I had no idea. And he actually walked me through everything that I needed to know for the first year of my transition.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hero.
Yeah. And it was something that I needed, but I didn't know I needed.
Right.
Yeah.
You guys?
For myself, it was definitely Laura Jane Grace, especially being like, feeling so outcast by society and not knowing why. And then to hear from like the depths of like a punk community to be like, wait, I know what's different. I definitely connected with that, yeah.
Amazing. For yourself, Lucah?
I would say there were probably two main moments now in my life. The first one was ANF Jace, probably, who was a YouTuber at the time. He was documenting his transition, and I was documenting mine, and he was like a few years ahead of me, and so that was looking at him and seeing, wow, okay, he looks great, all those things, made me feel a lot more confident. We've later become friends more in life. And then I think the second icon would probably be to reach the next level of my life as me outside of transition was probably Laverne Cox and Orange is the New Black. And I remember watching that show when it had come out. I was already years into transition, and I watched the show and I thought, I don't like when media puts cisgendered women as trans women.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, that kind of sucks that they have a cisgender woman playing a trans woman. Then I look her up, I find out she's actually trans. I send her a message on Facebook. She was not that big, so she replied.
Amazing.
And it was awesome.
Crazy.
And I was like, this is amazing. And she was like, thank you. And I was struggling myself with like, how do I reach my dreams? Because I think trans people, at least me, I struggle with that because, it's like you don't see yourself reflected. So you don't know you can achieve big stuff.
Right.
And so to see that, and I gave her some props, and she wrote me back and said, the best thing we can do as trans people is to live the way we want to live and not let it hold us back. And I made a movie after that, went to TIFF, went to Sundance. It's been great.
Yeah.
I'm very, I think she has really opened a ton of doors.
So
mentally.
Yeah. She came to mind when we were planning for this as well, but Caitlyn Jenner also is somebody who's even a bit of a bigger, it depends where you are, it depends who you are. She I would think the mainstream sees as the biggest icon for trans. Is that how you guys feel?
Absolutely not.
And how do you feel about what she's representing for the community?
Her transition, I feel, has been given so much attention, and it has really, really, really honed in on the idea that every trans person's experience is like the next.
Right.
Because it really isn't. I'm not saying that hers was easy or hers was as everyone else saw, but I think that she isn't the icon for all trans people.
Do you think she's trying to be, or do you think that's very much the media that's making it?
I think it has a lot to do with the media. In my opinion, I've seen the way that they've portrayed Caitlyn Jenner in the media, and it's, I think that it's the idea. I mean, when I tell people I'm trans, they ask me, somewhat as similar to Caitlyn Jenner. That's how, and I'm glad that, people have that reference, but I just think that her transition doesn't encompass in the grand scheme of things in terms of physically transitioning and having the resources and the opportunities as everyone else does. I think it's vastly different in general. Yeah.
How else do you guys feel about Caitlyn?
I actually had a funny story. Like at my old workplace, like I was doing something specific with one other person, and so we were like, it was quiet for a while, and he knew I was trans, and all of a sudden he just goes like, "How do you feel about Caitlyn Jenner?" And because everyone just thinks trans and then thinks Caitlyn
That's
Jenner.
what they think, yeah.
And there was no hatred against her. I mean, she launched, for better or for worse, she launched trans into middle America's home. And with her name is the Kardashian name and the Jenner name, so there is all of that. But yeah, it's important to stress that like we're not a monolith. Like she is fabulously rich, and she is allowed to be rich, and she is allowed to make her transition as beautiful as she wants it to be.
Right.
But it's important for other trans people to know that that's not the only path. A lot of trans people, all the power to her, but a lot of trans people, especially women, can't spend a year off and then come out looking like Cindy Crawford. It costs a lot of money. I had to work a really long time for facial feminization surgery. I had to work a long time to get hormones. It's more about class, and there can be rich trans people, there can be poor trans people, because we're not a monolith, which is what the media is trying to this is the trans story of all trans stories. I lived 65 years in the closet, and the Kardashians are so pretty, and then there's me who was in the boy shell, and now she just wants to be like a beautiful girl, but the media is trying to paint her as like the hero of all trans people when she's really not.
I think that does happen with celebrities a lot of the times, even for somebody who's gay who doesn't want to come out because they don't want to be the poster child of something, and because they're in the public eye, that's just sort of part of their job in a way.
Well, I think one of the very difficult things specifically within the trans community is because so many people still struggle to understand a lot of these terms, they seek every trans individual to be an advocate for their own community. And it's so difficult for some people because maybe I'm not ready to answer some of your questions.
Absolutely.
I thankfully am and pretty comfortable with that, but not everyone is. And to throw that responsibility on everyone, it's not their responsibility.
Absolutely. Let's actually go back a little bit in this conversation to some terms that I think people need to know more clearly. And so I want to once again go around the room and say that, so transgender as a word is one thing, trans people, but if you were once a boy that is now a girl, you are identifying as a transgender woman, correct?
That is the term, and that's the term,
generic,
yes.
Yeah.
That's the generic term,
Yes.
and vice versa, trans male.
Yeah.
Are those acceptable terms? Is that what we're using? Is that what the community's using?
It's less like boy becomes girl.
Right.
Everyone's experience is different, and there still are some people who are like, I was a boy, I was always a boy, and now I'm a girl.
Right.
And I'm happy with that. But there are some people who are like, in my experience of from talking about from my heart, I was always a girl.
Right.
It just now I'm taking steps to show that outwardly. I was always ashamed of it. I wasn't like a proud boy, and then I was just like, I want to be like a girl for fun. I was just like always a girl, and now
I think that's a very important distinction.
Yeah.
That it isn't always this journey. It sounds like you always knew.
Yeah, it was less like a journey from male to female, more like a journey from being ashamed of who I am to like being okay
Absolutely.
with it.
I would say a similar
Right.
thing to that. Like, obviously, I've seen trans men, you know, in older photos of themselves, in like they're wearing super girly clothes or in bikinis, very, you know, feminine gender expression. And of course, I have some pictures of like that of myself as well. But ultimately, when I look at the totality of my life, like being female was just so uncomfortable on like so many levels.
Every level.
Yeah.
You could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And I think this is where, even with this panel that we've put together, and we did gay men before this and drag queens, there is something universal about this. We didn't feel comfortable. Like, when I think about being straight, I'm just like, what? I've been out for 10 years. I can't even imagine like being in that form again.
So
And
like you were never actually
I was never
straight.
actually straight.
You were just pretending to be.
Exactly.
fit in.
And so this I think will help people understand a little bit more that it wasn't boy to girl. I was always a girl. My body didn't represent that, but we have the ability to change that in this 2018.
Well, it's difficult when society creates such rigid boxes that they are like so stuck on forcing people into. Like, another box that we need to obliterate is the binary altogether.
Right.
You know, there isn't just male and female. There isn't just trans men and trans women. It is a spectrum. There, you know, there are the non-binary community, which I think are a huge part of the trans community, that sit right in between,
Right.
or completely outside of.
Gender expression and sexual
Right.
orientation
We're
are
always
two separate
separate.
things, but we've lumped them together into LGBT.
Yes.
So how do you guys feel about the difference between those two things? Gender expression versus sexual orientation.
I mean, for me, it's like I've only started thinking about it more speaking at the high schools, middle schools and stuff, doing the Get Real stuff, because we do teach that sexuality and gender are different. And of course, I've known that as a trans person, but now it's really in the curriculum, like for some, you know, we want people to learn about it. And it has brought up in my mind this idea of the fact that we've put them all together and how it does complicate it for people.
Yeah.
And it makes it really confusing. When you tell people that, you know, it doesn't affect sexuality, because I still get question cards that say, you're trans, who do you like then? Like, what's your
Right.
sexual orientation?
You were a girl and now you're
You're
a boy,
so who do you date?
You were a lesbian and now
That's
you're
right.
straight?
And it's like,
Exactly.
really, they don't even get that far. It's like, yes, technically that is it, but that's a lot for people to take in. And so I think we have them all together, and I think it's great that we can be a big community. But it also reminds me that, you know, maybe we will see more separation of those things in the future, and more space between those, in that conversation.
I mean, for us, the queer is where we see this as a big umbrella. Queer Network, that's what we're all about, even though queer has, you know, a history of being a derogatory term. Before it was that, it was also just weird and different. So how do you guys see the word queer? Is it something you identify with?
Personally, at the beginning of my transition, and earlier on before that, because I was always a very masculine presenting, I guess, female biologically, even before I came out as trans, and those words that were used in the schoolyard or in classroom setting, when somebody was trying to antagonize you, especially for me being visually different, I got the word queer thrown at me, I got the word fag thrown at me, and these are sometimes words that people in the community can own and say, I do identify as queer. And now I would say, yes, I'm under the umbrella term of queer, but I don't personally identify as with that word, because I think it just had such a negative connotation at the beginning, and I don't think that is always going to be that way. I think that now a lot of people are very comfortable with using that word. I personally, I wouldn't say that I'm a queer individual. I'm more so looking towards specific vocabulary, like trans man or man.
How does everybody else feel?
By gender, I identify as a trans woman, but sexually, I identify as queer. I think it gives me the freedom to have what I've always been really comfortable with sexually, but something that I find is also very common within trans communities is like a redefinition of like sexual identity. Because I know for myself, it was like, all right, well, I've always been really interested in females romantically and intimately, but if I would want to be like accepted and understood as a trans woman, would I be comfortable with another trans woman? Well, yeah, of course. Well, if we are going to bring it to the like issue of body parts, is that body part in the way? Well, no. So what is the difference between like being interested in a man or a trans man? And then it really just breaks down your complete concept of like how we function in this world through all of these. And I definitely, I think queer gives me the freedom to, freely exist and explore within.
Totally.
I don't really identify as queer. I like the word. I like how it's just a very open word that can imply like 700 different meanings based on who you are. But I always identified mostly as straight, like ever since I came out. Like I when I was like a teen, like a young teen, I liked boys and I liked girly things, so I thought that meant I was gay. Because like everyone, like it's confusing. I was conflating sexual orientation with gender expression and gender identity. But in reality, I was just a girl and a girl who likes guys, and that my gender expression is very feminine. So I don't personally identify with queer, but I love the word.
I like the word too, and say, very similar experience to me. I truly felt as though I was a boy forever, and so my liking women always came from a very heterosexual place, almost to probably like a completely societally created. I mean, sometimes you get, over the years of transition, you always get that question like, if gender wasn't a thing, would you still transition? And all that, right? And I've gotten, I think, better and better at just being like, probably, and if that's wrong, it's wrong, and if it's not wrong, I'm not above saying that I'm affected by society's ideas of gender or that I play into those stereotypes at times. But I think for me, I do identify as straight, but in saying that, I have a big part of me too that I would say is not straight and has since transition opened up a lot. Just my idea of what sexuality can mean, and that you can say that you're straight without meaning that you're the straightest person on earth.
Right, because I think
still,
it's a spectrum.
you can still enjoy. If I met a man and I actually was like super into that, I would be like, okay, cool, I guess I'm gonna be.
You wouldn't neglect that for yourself.
Yes, exactly.
And thus the emergence of like hetero-flexible.
There we go.
And then your preferences are going to change if you allow them to, and I think that's part of what the queer community does for the straight community, is shows them that it isn't just one way, it's not binary, and that even if you're a straight hetero male, if you wanted to go to a music festival or you just wanted to go to the village and see a drag queen, or you wanted to dress up differently yourself, these labels and these restrictions are your own doing, and you have the ability to do whatever you want.
I would say outside, like physically, sure, I'm transitioning a lot, but the greatest portion of my transition is that mentally breaking down societal expectations and coming to new understandings.
Well, I think that brings us perfectly to the next thing I want to talk about, which is transitioning. This is a word we talked about in the auditions, and I think you had an amazing answer. In that I think most people want to just know where you're at, as in give me that boy-girl transition. Now, let's talk about that, because we need to break, I think, some of that down. What is the transitioning? How does it happen?
I know, my thing too is when people ask, so is it done? They're asking about
with the eyebrows
genitalia. Is it done?
Is it done?
Completely, they're asking that.
And it's like,
We had this switch.
is it all finished? I think it's taken a long time for me to just like process the fact that I'll probably get that question forever until things start to be more understood. But I really like to think of my transition as always, really, at this point. I feel so different now than I did 5 years ago. I feel different 5 years ago as I did before, and I'm sure I'll feel different 5-10 years. Like, I think to think that we as human beings are not in a sort of transition holds us back pretty intensely. So I've A, opened myself up to a life of transition, and B, removing it from genitalia as much as I possibly can. If it was just about the penis or the vagina, then that we all know that doesn't really make any sense, because when we think about sexuality and we think about who we like, that would mean everyone with that genitalia, no matter how they looked, you'd be attracted to it. Like if it was like, if you were a straight woman, you're like, I like penis, then you like everything with a penis, and we know that that's not true.
No.
Exactly.
So it's got to be somewhere outside of that.
Yeah, I would say like, again, like a theme for me of teaching people would be that trans people aren't all the same. So for some people, transitioning is getting bottom surgery, getting top surgery, getting like 4 to 5 surgeries, getting like, for me, like that's my current plan. I've underwent like some procedures and stuff, and I still plan for more, but there are some trans girls who are like, you know what, like this is the body I was born in, and or there are some trans people, and I don't need to physically transition to prove that, and that's totally okay. And if I were to like use like a metaphor for it, it would maybe be like going to school. Like some people drop out of high school, some people finish high school, some people finish their undergrad, some people get a master's, and some people get a PhD. But I'm not implying that more is better.
Right.
Just what we do sometimes as a society, which is annoying.
Yeah, like people say, like even people who have transitioned more extensively, they say they refer to themselves as fully transitioned.
Right.
Which that doesn't mean full. It means you've fully transitioned for yourself.
Physically, maybe.
Physically.
But the emotional must play an even more extensive part.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of like revisiting the answer I had during the audition was that society really needs to step away from like this A to B transition, because especially speaking up for our non-binary siblings once again, they don't seek to go anywhere.
Right.
You know, they might want to have certain procedures or not. Maybe they want HRT. Maybe they just want to present differently than society expects of them. I have a friend who's a trans woman and takes on that identity as trans woman, but is so comfortable with the body that society regularly deems as male and celebrates that body as much as they have the identity of trans woman. That still doesn't negate their transness or their womanhood.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course.
100%.
Of course not. It's also important to remember that as trans people, we are not obligated to share that information.
Absolutely.
What a crazy idea it is to ask a trans individual, do you have a penis or a vagina? When you would go up to imagine going up to a cisgender, or assuming they were cisgendered and saying, how's your vagina today?
Yeah, so how long is your penis?
Exactly, it's not applicable. It's just,
I need to know.
It's only when you
Because I have a preference for a 6-inch dick.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why you should tell me
personal.
that.
It's for their own, because we like to identify.
We just love it. And I think that it's only when you tell people that you're trans do people want to know penis or vagina, exactly as you said, and yeah.
And so this also then brings up sex.
Right.
And which we talked a little bit about before this. And I think what it brings up for me is what's off limits. What is necessary to ask, and yet trans is such a new thing. It's funny because it's not new, but it's new for mainstream.
Yeah.
So I want to ask about sex, but a part of me is like, that's off limits. Why should I ask you guys how you have sex? How do you guys feel about that?
So where does it go? I was asked that once.
So where does it go?
Yeah, because I was like in the changing room with my friend, and we were like in her underwear, and like she was just like, so where does it go? And I was like, I'm not gonna answer that.
No.
I left it in my purse.
But how do you address it in the moment when that happens?
It's really tough.
I flat out say, that's really personal, and I'm not gonna
Yeah,
answer.
it's none of your business.
Because it's not our obligation to be their handholder and educator.
Especially with the internet. With the internet now, it's like you can look up trans bodies.
Yeah.
A time ago, again, when I first started transition, really hard to find a picture of a trans body online. I've seen that change more and more open up. Like specifically, I'll give you like an example. Obviously, with the birth of online porn and everything like that, I remember years ago it was like, especially for trans men, there was no trans men porn. Like Buck Angel might have been the only one, but now you Google that and it's like there's videos, home videos of hundreds of trans men having sex. So it's like that in and of itself shows that we've changed as a society. And I think that to focus so much on the whole like where does it go question or those types of things forgets that there's so many ways to have sex.
Right.
You know, kind of what you were saying, and the whole how do trans people have sex thing. It's like, well, how does anybody have sex? And you know, sex is intimate, especially growing up. And I don't like the term lesbian, but as a girl who liked girls, the whole concept of like losing your virginity is still something that people are like I would have considered myself having lost my virginity to a woman as a woman. That was the first time I was naked with somebody, touched each other. That was the deal. The whole intercourse focus, as it's like the older I get, the more it just
So
like
narrow-minded.
makes
It just
me
doesn't
get
make
really
sense.
is.
And it's,
angry, you know?
Yeah, and it's also, you know, when people in the sense when you're speaking to someone, you can kind of gauge what their intentions are. And you know, when people seem like they're more just asking out of curiosity and not out of educational reasons, or I just stand on my head and click my heels 3 times. What do you want me to tell you?
Yeah.
I have sex like a normal heterosexual man, but there's nothing else to it that I can provide.
Yeah, it comes back to it's like people see it as boy or girl. You were a boy, now you're a girl, so how do you do the things that boys do as opposed to how you did the things that girls do? And we just know that that's not the way it is
The
anymore.
ridiculous thing to me about the whole like fascination and how stuck society is on intercourse is it's not even just a queer like dilemma. People with disabilities also experience this.
Yeah.
You know, like
You're right, it isn't just a queer thing.
yeah. So like I would like even dare to say that a greater part of the population, you know, than people may like consider really don't necessarily have intercourse the way we all
I know we
think.
think that everyone has intercourse, and it's like I've talked to many cisgendered men too who are like don't want to have intercourse.
Yep.
Not interested really. I like making out. I'm down to do some other stuff, but can't have intercourse. Can't come. Not fun. Doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Sex education is so important, and I really think that it's like for myself, a lot of my growing came through like looking things up online. But now that there's like censorship on YouTube and it demonetizes queer people, especially those who are seeking to educate, especially those who are seeking to educate the youth who need it, because like let's not fool ourselves. I lost my virginity when I was 13. Like you know, I needed that information very young, and now it's making it more and more difficult for those voices to be heard, seen, spread. Or even just afford to keep doing this work.
For me, it's like the context of who's asking.
I was just gonna say that.
If I'm at work or I'm at school and someone I just met or just came out to is like, how do you have sex? Like, I'm not gonna listen to you. I have work to do and I have school to do. Like, we're in a setting where that's not okay. But when I'm with my trans girlfriends or maybe I mentioned trans girls a lot. I have trans guy friends, but when I have trans girlfriends asking specifically for advice on like maybe younger trans girls or who haven't even been on hormones for long, like what happens to their penis or how they have sex, I'll get really in depth because that's the right context. Or a safe space like this, where it's all trans people and you want to learn about us. Like this is the space where you ask versus like trans people get offended when you ask. When I'm at school learning about criminology and you ask me how I have sex. Like no, I don't want to answer that right now.
But I'm sensing that the answer is also that it's the same thing as I don't ask my parents how they have sex.
Totally, and that's
I know
100%,
generally,
yes.
but if you want to know the general specifics of how a transgender person or how lesbians or how whatever people have sex, you could look up online.
Absolutely.
Or look up in a book even.
I learned about trans sex online, like just on YouTube, how to date and stuff, and personal experience. If you're that curious, look it up. But also, like, in this specific space. If you had personal questions, I would be willing to answer them.
Mm-hmm.
What I was just about to say is similar to what Sam said. It's in context to whom you're with. And for me, if I'm comfortable with my partner or the person that I'm engaging with sexually, then I will have that conversation with it. If it's pertinent for them to know, if I have feelings for somebody, or if I'm going in something with my heart attached to it, then that's something that I will talk about.
Right. It can be as black and white as you buying a packer. Is that what we call it?
They're called packers.
You can
yeah.
call
Packer,
it,
and you can wear that.
Just
and
don't
you can,
confuse packer and strap-on. That's the
Right.
Totally
That's
different.
the-
I hate when people
no,
say that. They're like,
This
"Oh,
is-
to use a strap."
I hate that.
Yes.
When
Okay,
you use a
so-
strap-on, it's like, go.
Number one, there's a difference between a strap-on and a
Yes.
packer.
Yes.
Packer being something.
Packers and prosthetics.
And
are also
prosthetics.
different.
Prosthetic is the prosthetic. That's the term for
A
the
medical
most
prosthesis.
penis-like fake penis on
Sure.
that's available.
Like
So
we're
for
talking,
those-
we're talking. It adheres to your body.
Body,
There you
you
go.
have to buy it online. It's like
$500,
hardcore.
$600.
But again, the reason why it's not, and then you can finish.
I think. Give me just.
Okay, go for it.
I think that certain people want to know that black and white
Yeah.
answer. But what we're getting at here is that it's not black and white, and that sex isn't just a penis and a vagina, or two dicks, or two vaginas.
Yes.
So, as much as somebody at home wants to know that, but how do you do it? How literally do you do it?
Yeah.
Is that really the question?
When you really think about it, it comes back to that whole penis vagina thing. That sex is a penis going into a vagina, and then there's ejaculation. That's the sex. And of course, yeah, that's the way I guess we've thought about sex for a really long time. But I've talked to many trans people, and obviously had experiences myself, and I've learned that a lot of people don't use any prosthetic at all.
Right.
They're in the same way that there's bi people and there's gender fluidity. People are attracted to tons of different things, and so to say just you had brought up pegging, things like that. That's something that there's traditionally heterosexual people, are doing that type of stuff
That's
as well. When a woman has sex with a man
With a strap.
with a strap on.
Yeah.
Right, but they're in a heterosexual relationship, but
Gotcha.
their genitals are doing the opposite
Right.
based
Yeah.
on whatever. It's like that is a reality of heterosexual sex, and the fact that or sex in general, and the fact that, everyone else isn't granted that same type of fluidity is just like.
To me, it's offensive when people ask because it's the first thing they ask, and it's reducing me to
Yes.
a walking genital.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
So that's why it's offensive. And maybe your intentions aren't bad, and that's okay, but it's like someone stepping on your toe, like whether or not they meant it, it still hurts.
Absolutely.
So it's like, to put it in a queer perspective, it's like you coming out as queer and people not being like asking interesting, stimulating questions, but it's like, oh, are you top or you bottom?
Right.
Or like, how do you have sex? Or like,
Immediately wanting
like
to know.
what's your like fetish? It's like just like it's just like like that's uncomfortable for me to ask. I don't
Right.
know why it's like comfortable for people think it's okay for them to just come right out and ask what I have in my pants when it really doesn't concern you. It
Yeah.
won't make your day any better or worse.
Exactly.
I think the really difficult part about it as well is it's strangers that are bringing this question to you, and they're not even taking the time to get to know you as an individual or anything beyond that. It's different if someone's like, showing care and concern, consideration for your life. Concern is probably a bad word there, but like for a friend to ask me, I have no issues. When a stranger out of the blue is just like, so what are you doing down there?
Yeah.
What's going on? Like,
Yeah.
what the heck does it matter to anyone? Like.
So this is clearly this is a challenge within your community. What are some other big challenges that we haven't touched on yet today?
Dating.
Yeah,
Dating.
dating.
About to get to
So
dating.
how do you date?
Oh. I didn't actually know what dating was like as a single trans man until halfway through my first year of university. And at that point, it went from being the question, it went from me having to tell people what my pronouns were to having to consider, oh, do I tell this girl that I'm trans now? Or
Right.
how do I tell her? It's not about expressing my identity because I wasn't on testosterone. It was about, do I share this with
Yeah.
this person? That's why dating for me is difficult, because now it's like the opposite.
Right.
I'm right back in the closet. It
Yeah,
feels
you
like
come out all the
Yeah.
time.
it feels like I have to come out to almost every woman that I have affectionate feelings for.
Right. You had mentioned something in audition about that, how you sort of dropped the hint early on.
Oh, no, or just that I try to bring it up as soon as possible for me.
Mhm.
Like I haven't
I do
done
too,
that before where I don't like being with people when they don't know that I'm trans. It makes me really uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I'd rather just feel safe and, you know, with a communication on the table. Being single trans person is probably one of the biggest accomplishments in my life, because growing up, you just grow up, I think for me at least, a lot of like issues with self-esteem and those types of things, and so it's so easy to try to find a partner to help you through all of that. And I transitioned with a partner as well, and having been single for the last couple of years and had many different experiences. I like to just tell people as fast as possible, and the guys that I find who don't do that struggle with dating a lot more, because it's like the way that it's said, where it's like you go on a few dates with a girl and then you're like, okay, we need to talk tonight.
Right.
I got something really important to tell you. If you don't like me anymore, I need you to know that's okay. Like, that's always been the bad way to do it.
Yeah.
I feel like it freaks people out. So I try to just go in with a whole, like, I'm trans, normalize it, you're in or you're out, and that's just it. And that's taken a lot of mental effort to, like, just be cool with it.
Like I could go like 2 hours about how shitty dating is. But to condense it a lot, I have like 3 main points. One, as a trans feminine person, our experiences are vastly different from trans men. Because coming out to men, it's still like a legal defense in like 48 states that like, I didn't know she was trans as a reason to kill her. Like that's like a legal defense that's not banned. Only 2 states ban that. And like, of like the 370 trans people that were killed this year worldwide, majority of them were trans women of color and street workers. So men find out they're trans and get very violent. So it's a different field, first of all. So for me, for safety reasons, I used to not say I was trans on like Tinder. So I'd get guys who like talk to me or even say like I'm so pretty, blah blah blah, and then I tell them I'm trans and they say terrible things to me, and then they unmatch me. So now I have it in my bio, but when I have it in my bio, they don't talk to me like I'm a person.
Totally.
They are right away. It's do you have a dick? And then I say to them, that's not really relevant for you just getting to know me. Like I haven't even said hi to you. I don't even know your like last name. And they were like, that's just the dating world, get used to it. Like very condescending. And in my opinion, if I have trans in my bio and you're okay with that, it shouldn't matter to you like until like right before when I tell you how I prefer to have sex. Like just like every person in the world has a way they prefer to have sex.
Absolutely.
And it's not really talked about until usually even in the moment, what they like and what they
Sometimes
don't.
it isn't even talked about in the moment.
Yeah.
This is the problem with sex, is
but
we don't say what we want.
With trans people, it's like we're expected to say, we're expected to lay it all out. Like,
Right,
do you have it? Do you like to use it?
Yeah.
This is me. Do you have it? Do you like to use it? Do you do this? Do you do that? And it's like, well, if you're fine with me being trans, it shouldn't be discussed until we're in the bedroom, because I don't just pick up a guy off the street and sleep with them.
Right.
And then also my third main point is that there's people who are fetishized trans people.
Very true.
It's a politically incorrect term, so I'll just say trans girl chasers.
Okay.
Who like girls, are like the opposite of people who are revolted by trans girls. They're obsessed with trans girls for their penises.
Right.
And it feels just as gross.
Yeah.
And they still ask you what you have, and if like they really want to sleep with you, and it's gross.
Right.
So I'm 20 and I've never been in a relationship.
Right.
So I've yet to find a guy who is not on either end of that spectrum of being grossed out by me or being obsessed about that one singular part of me.
Does it make you feel forced to only stick to the trans community?
Yeah. I mean,
Like you'd rather date somebody who also is...
I'd rather date a trans guy, to be quite
because
honest.
then you know they'll understand.
Yeah, I mean...
To some degree? Like,
I mean, they'll understand as close as it can be to understanding what it's like to be trans.
Right.
And
is there
body
places for you
limits and
guys
stuff.
to go? Are there
Not
apps?
No.
Like nothing, does anything
Nothing
exist yet?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there is Grindr.
Right.
But there is a trans subsection.
Okay.
Is there? I thought that was only for gay men.
No. You have to get into it.
Okay,
So,
so
I've
never heard
made
I don't know anything
so
about dating apps,
You
though,
could
so.
so on Grindr you could categorize yourself as trans, and then there's a filter where it's just trans. I don't actually totally recommend it. So it's either trans people or people who love trans people, and
Right.
that invites
And
a lot of
that's-
chasers.
Right.
So I actually don't recommend it for meeting cis people, but you can actually find some really cool trans people on there.
Right.
I found it kind of like difficult, like how quickly it is for someone to get aggressive on either side of those as well. Whether it is someone who is like, what are you doing? I'm not gay. And it's like, there's nothing gay about this if it's me with a man, you know?
Right.
Like, you-
Right.
But, you know, of course, they're automatically assuming what I have in my pants,
Yep.
how I perform, whatever. And then on the other side, I've had chasers who have literally like harassed me constantly, just being like, how could you know I want this?
Right.
And, you know, like, what, like, it's just crazy. It's mind blowing.
I find that too, like even being male in the dating world, but as an out trans person, it's not the same type of aggression from the chaser side when it comes from, I would say, cisgendered women, but I definitely experience it. There's such a high level of curiosity that there's like an overbearingness
Yes.
to want to hook up because they're comfortable with their bodies and they just like really want to get to sex as fast as possible. And like I find that really difficult, not just because there's a pressure for men who are like, men always want it, and this idea that like, you know, that I'm always just gonna want sex because of that. And then also I feel like there's not a lot of understanding for the fact that, you know, as a trans person, it's taken years to accept my body, and
Right.
I still struggle with that at some points, and so to immediately just jump in the bed is just not, I'm not gonna come to it with the same
No.
type of way that you might think.
If it is a one-time experience, if I've been out, if I'm going to, you know, a club or a bar and I take a girl home with me, I find that it's not important for me to share that if it's in that one instance. However, I do like to go in, and not even just because I'm trans, I would also like somebody that I'm affiliating myself with in different senses to have a wide range of knowledge about the LGBTQ community. Even if I'm not trans, I would like them, you know, I wouldn't be able to date a person if they weren't accepting of all people.
You guys are trailblazers.
Thank you.
That's what you
But
want.
the problem with being a trailblazer sometimes are like, you know, it's like you have all the arrows in your back.
Yep.
I mean, it's like there's been pain on this journey.
Of
You know,
course.
and it's like I hope to find a day where trans people are granted the same type of love and respect as other people. You know, that'd be great. That'd be amazing to be able to just go on a date with someone, for them to know that you're trans and have it not bring up all these questions and all their identity. You know, like I've dated women before who are now lesbians dating women, and they didn't want to date me because they didn't like being straight and
Right.
stuff, right? And it's like dealing with those two sides, that not only are you in a very complicated identity yourself, but that your identity somehow impacts the other person's sense of self, their sexuality, you know, it's all of these things that I think is only really trans people deal with that.
Are you guys at all ever still living stealth? And by stealth, for anybody who doesn't know, it just means that you're not like outward about your trans identity.
There, circumstantially, I do think so. At the gym, and in social scenarios where it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But my being trans isn't my whole personality.
Right.
In the sense of being a trans individual, there are so many things that we have come to learn and know about ourselves, where our identities do really speak to us as a person a lot, in our struggles and our endeavors, and everything that we do, you know, is in reflection of what we've had to overcome and push through as a trans individual.
Yeah.
It's situationally important.
Yeah.
But in general, I would like somebody to know that I am trans, because
Be open and
be
it allows you
open,
to talk about life.
You know, because that's the thing. Because I can't be authentic with you and
Yes.
tell you, hey, you know what? Getting dressed today was really hard.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I've been with like
Getting
lots.
dressed is fucking hard.
Yeah, like getting dressed is really hard. Like really mundane. Like really
It's
like.
really emotional.
It is very emotional. And I was with lots of girls, you know, who didn't understand that. It would
Yeah.
take me 40 whole minutes longer than them for me to get all my shit together and
Right.
be male presenting in my eyes.
Yeah.
You know, I used to wear 2 t-shirts.
The binder with
The binder with the t-shirt
chest
and
with the
then
duct tape.
with everything, and then like
it's a lot.
the sports tensor bandages, like that whole, we don't talk about and we don't see those parts of trans people's lives.
So this brings up something that I think a lot of people want to know, why then you would want to put yourself through this. And I know the answer to that, but I need you guys to talk through that.
Well, I'll kick it off then. I like to say sometimes, because people do sometimes ask, you know, I do like to say that being trans wasn't a choice for me.
No.
Transitioning is a choice.
For
You know,
sure.
you don't have to transition. I wanted to transition. I wanted to look this way, and so dealing with all of that. But in terms of picking being trans or like wanting this life,
Absolutely.
personally, no way would I ever
I would
choose
Never.
this.
Yeah.
No, for sure. It's hard. It's really hard sometimes.
Like,
Yeah, it's not easy.
and this is a pretty vulnerable statement, but I was in my first year of university when I finally realized, like, if I have to like present as male for one more day, like, I'm gonna kill myself.
Totally.
Seriously,
Like, it gets
absolutely.
to a point where you really contemplate suicide. The suicide rates with trans people are really high, and
Yeah.
for a reason. Like, we're just so suppressed,
Yeah.
and then, like, why would you ever want to go through this unless it
You
becomes
would-
like
you
I
have
want
to.
to
Because if you didn't,
that's
it's
it.
worse.
Yeah.
I
kill
actually-
myself if I don't do this.
Yes.
I actually have a trauma that comes from the fact that my sense of reality growing up was that I am female, and to have that continuously every day on every level totally destroyed. No, that's not correct. That's not true.
Yeah.
I now freak out every time I think that I don't have a grasp on reality. I'm constantly over, talking with all my friends, being like, wait a minute, am I seeing something straight? Is there something I'm missing? And it doesn't matter what I think I am not seeing correctly. I freak out when I think that I don't see reality clearly.
Right.
Because if there's one thing I know, it's that I'm a woman.
Right.
And to have all of society reject that was destroying me. Yeah, I would easily be dead
Yeah.
if I couldn't be me today.
Do you think that there's a too early to transition?
No.
Like a little boy
Absolutely.
who knows?
No.
I'm
jealous of people who transition.
It's true that transition younger. Yeah, I wish you could always. It's like you can always have transition younger. I think sometimes it's hard to say though, in terms of obviously people can do whatever, and I think that I would have loved to be a little trans kid who had the access that people do now.
Yeah.
But I think by default too, I think based on the fact that we're having a lot of people transition at a lot of different ages, we have yet to see. It's hard to answer because we have yet to see what happens, the implications of it, positive or negative. Like, it's just a very new concept, and so sure, there might be people who weren't actually trans that then were allowed to transition and then they regret it, and there might be people who vice versa, and I just don't think we're gonna know for a really long time.
But also, I think in adding on to that, like if a child is using that specific vocabulary, like if they can identify, like I'm in the wrong body, not I am insecure in this body, I am in the wrong one. If you can use those terms and identify that in your child, and then but have them speak it to you, don't put that on them.
Yeah.
That's one thing my mother always told me, was that I never wanted to impose on you finding your identity by placing these words on you. I waited until you came to me, and it just so happened it took 16 years.
Is there an age limit? Could a kid, how early
to be
on could they?
Oh, but you, Sam probably knows the most.
Well, you can go on hormone blockers, and those are reversible. So, let's say you're even a 11-year-old kid, and you're about to start the horrors of puberty,
Right.
and you're an 11-year-old little boy, and and you need to be a girl,
Right.
and you're like, you don't need to start estrogen. You
Right.
can just delay it.
Block
It's
the
like a
testosterone.
little placeholder.
Right.
So hormone blockers, like, you can be on them for a couple of years without any health damages, and then it's just reversible. And then
Right.
you would go through male puberty if you're like, you know what? But there have been very little documented cases of even young teenagers who are now older, like Jazz, like that show I Am Jazz. Like, there have been very little documents of people who are like detransitioning. It's very rare.
It's very rare.
And it shouldn't be to make it shouldn't make the case of people who don't want to go on them.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
I always say like those things were like, what would you say to your younger self? And I was like, I would like beat the shit out of my younger self and tell myself like to start hormone blockers, because for trans girls, testosterone is an evil hormone,
Right.
and it is so like
It changes your whole face.
changes
As someone who's
skeleton
tasted
As someone
structure.
who's
Yeah.
not, yeah.
yeah.
I'm not saying trans guys have it easier, but trans guys have
No, we
more
do.
softer faces. Whatever. I just don't want to get
Um,
paid.
very soft face,
So,
yeah, I do.
so trans guys, when they start out, they have softer faces, and then
Uh-huh.
testosterone adds. So it like adds bone
Right.
structure, it adds
Yeah.
muscle, it adds everything. It adds height even, it adds facial hair, it adds hair everywhere.
The width of my
Estrogen,
shoulders.
yeah. And like testosterone is such a strong hormone that trans guys don't have to take estrogen blockers, but trans girls have to take testosterone blockers.
I took a blocker
Right.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah, really?
I was on blockers, yeah.
Oh, then never mind.
But I was really
General.
young.
You
I was-
can, but you don't necessarily. It won't have the same implications. That's
Yeah.
the point.
You
Yeah.
have to
It
if
doesn't
you're a
exactly. It doesn't
So,
have the same
For
implications.
me, it's like if I had started when I was 11, I wouldn't be 6'3", I wouldn't have broad shoulders, I wouldn't have had to spend $20,000 on face surgery. It just saves countless years of pain and dysphoria.
Right.
But that's the opinion of a trans
No,
person.
no, that makes
And-
it's completely true, because even when I recently saw an old friend who didn't tell me anything about anything that they're doing, but like immediately I could tell they were on testosterone immediately,
Yeah.
And
just
their voice.
based on based on
Your
what
voice
testosterone
doesn't
does to your face.
Right.
Your voice doesn't change
Like-
in estrogen.
Right.
Yeah.
Once your voice drops, it's dropped. And
Right.
for trans guys, their voice will drop on
Yes.
testosterone.
Mhm.
But for
Yeah.
trans girls, your voice won't change. Your shoulders, for the most part, won't change. Like your height won't change.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, I'm not speaking for all trans girls, but it fucking sucks
Right.
that I couldn't have just taken blockers and blocks like my height, my
Mhm.
broad shoulders, my
Mhm.
face, like my voice.
Well, I think it's wonderful to know that there are stages and levels, and I think people start freaking out. They're like, "Oh, she was 12 and she already started transitioning." Like they get a whole slew of ideas what that means, but that doesn't just all of a sudden mean that they're like
Yeah,
completely.
they just like postponed puberty.
Mhm.
And for someone who's really struggling with figuring that out, and it could be very detrimental for their mental health, like
Take them to a
And there's late
Yeah.
bloomers. Like
Well,
now,
that
some
was-
people don't go
that-
through puberty till they're
Like,
older
exactly.
anyways.
But even in therapy, like from middle school and being young too, I distinctly remember telling my therapist that I thought I was a boy, basically, and that I was born in the wrong body, but no transition brought up. And I
Right.
think that was part of a reflection of, this was the early 2000s. It was still like, don't mention that to a kid.
Right.
Nowadays, there's like specific
Yes,
gender
it's
therapists.
different.
So
Yes.
if you're a parent who's watching this and your 6 to 11-year-old kid is like, I am the gender that is the opposite of what I was assigned,
Mhm.
take them to someone outside of your perspective and take them to a gender therapist and trust that they're doing the right work.
Right.
Because it's not like doctors are just giving people hormones.
Right.
Totally.
Like trans people have to wait for hormones.
So incredibly long.
Yeah, like it's not like they're just like, oh, you want to be a girl? Like here's some estrogen. Like
Yeah.
enjoy life. Like they take it seriously as parents do and
Right.
people do. So I strongly recommend it.
Part of the reason we wanted to do this project is to ask the question how we speak to people who don't understand us. And I think as the trans community, you experience some of the worst hate out there. And so how do we speak to those people who don't get it?
I always say with patience, because when I first started transitioning, I would always say to my mom, like, people keep using like female pronouns with me. I keep getting misgendered, and I'm getting all this, this shit from all these people. What do I do? And she said, well, you have to be some level of understanding, because if they don't know, it's not their fault that they don't know.
Right.
What the determining factor of that situation is if it's in malicious intent.
Right.
If their intentions are to hurt you, okay, well that you can just fuck off with that.
Right.
But if they really want to know and they're just ignorant, it is not their fault, because prior to being 16, what did I know about being transgender?
Mhm.
Nothing. So it's all about being open to saying, okay, this person doesn't understand me because they've never had the experiences or the opportunities to understand it.
Right.
But if they're willing to, with patience
Right.
and kindness.
Actually have a genuine connection. Want to understand that person on a deeper level than just the like, so how do you have sex? What
Right.
are your genitals like?
Mhm.
You know, want to understand it on a broader spectrum than that individual person's experience.
Mhm.
I think, people who don't understand it, we can do what we can to help educate. But I also think, not everyone's going to understand.
Exactly. That's the whole thing about Get Real.
Not
too, is
everyone's going to
that-
understand everybody, and finding ways to relate outside of the transition, that's been huge. We see those
Mhm.
impacts at the school, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
I come out and then people are really shocked and surprised, but then they're the ones who are wanting to shake hands at the end,
Yep.
and, their perception of what transit has changed.
Just
and
from sharing
Yeah,
stories.
just from telling the experience, and they've realized, oh wow, like this guy has bad days and I have bad days, and
Mhm.
like that can be sometimes enough.
Exposure to it, yeah.
Yeah, exposure and normalization, and not, on some level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just patience
Yeah.
with personal family members if they don't get it.
Mhm.
I at first, like, I'm not going to mention a specific family member, but a family member was like, I just can't call you your preferred name, it's too weird for me.
Right.
And now they're the ones like correcting people when I get
Mhm.
misgendered. It just takes patience for them to just see you again.
Yeah.
For every trans person, I think it's so important to stand strong in who you are.
Yeah.
But for people that don't understand, sometimes the best thing you can just do is just let it be
Yeah.
and keep being your authentic self, and that will show through.
No matter what people think of that, if they don't dig that, then
It's not your problem.
it's not your problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you feel about all these new labels within the queer community? Pansexual, non-binary, gender fluid. I mean, transgender is a part of those new terms. Do you feel lumped into that, or like those are even newer than transgender?
Well, but if they're pertaining to gender, if they're new terms pertaining to gender, but if they're new terms pertaining to sexuality, I think those are two different things, right?
Right.
Like pansexualism
Yeah.
and
That's sexual orientation.
that sexual orientation, and then non-binary being somewhere on that spectrum of gender expression. I think
Mhm.
they're different.
Yeah.
I think that non-binary people definitely do have a place in the trans community. I
Mhm.
think that they're definitely on that spectrum for sure. And I think that as a world, we're constantly growing and evolving and coming across new ideas and theories, and we're always exercising those and expressing those. And I think that as the world continues, we will have more words to identify and label. But I don't really assign any kind of label,
Right.
just because I think that is just such a rigid box.
I'd like us to get away from labels too, but also we like labels a lot. So
As human
it's-
beings, we like to identify.
It's hard to.
Our left brain and ego likes to.
Yeah, I
Try
guess.
to put everything
Simply
into a
put,
box.
as we evolve as human beings, our language must too.
Mhm.
Of course.
There's just like so many ways to be a human.
Yeah.
I think that the more labels, the better. Like in terms of the more ones being introduced.
Right.
Like if you don't find one that fits you, by
It's
all
not.
means. Like I'm friends with a non-binary demi-girl trans person, so that means like they sometimes feel like a girl, sometimes feel non-binary, and that's the perfect label for them.
Yeah.
And labels don't have to be restrictive if you're in the right one.
Mhm.
And I think humans are complex, every single human. So I love labels.
Yeah. And I think that's what
Label maker.
transgender brings. Like humans have always been complex, but we've categorized them into these like simple little boxes of boy, girl, masculine, feminine, all that. Whereas I think part of what you all have done in your own ways with the people that are in your lives is shown them how much more complex and unique we all really are.
Yeah.
You get to show that on a much more physical, like really out there way, but I think what I think people can identify, and I hope people identify even if you identify as straight, is that you have so much more going on in you than you even know.
Mhm.
And you guys have had to go through that publicly, but we all have the opportunity to do that if we want to. from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being here. This is such a pleasure to hear all of your stories, and thank you for sharing so intimately. And for all of you watching at home, I hope that you learned something new. I hope that you got something insightful out of this because they were being so open about their lives. And if you have more questions, comment below. We will be as vigilant as we can to answer those. If you've never been to the Queer Network before, subscribe to the channel, like this video, hit that notification bell so you stay up to date on everything that we're doing. And thank you so much for watching.